All right, it's about 10:05 a.m., so we're going to go ahead and get started for this workshop. Thank you and good morning. On behalf of my colleagues at DRPT, I would like to thank you all for attending today's FTA Discretionary Grant Writing Workshop. My name is Tiffany Dubinsky. I am a statewide transit planning manager here in our Richmond office, and it will be my pleasure today to moderate the workshop because nothing says I love you like talking about federal grants after Valentine's Day. Next slide, please. So a few housekeeping items. Today's workshop will be recorded and posted on DRPT's YouTube channel. You can find that YouTube channel either by searching for DRPT YouTube or linked on our DRPT webpage, that's drpt.virginia.gov. We are encouraging all participants to ask questions as they come in, so you may either feel free to put your questions in the chat function, or if you would prefer, you may raise your hand and either myself or Mary Olivia with our communications team will unmute you and you can ask the speakers your questions directly. We are trying to plan a break right around 11 o'clock, but we do anticipate being able to go through most of the material pretty quickly. Slides will also be distributed to participants after the workshop concludes, so feel free to look for that in your email after today. And then, as always, please contact us if you have any follow-up questions and or need any assistance. Next slide. Today's speakers, of course, you see myself, but hopefully you won't have to hear too much from me as your moderator. The real stars of the show today will be Grant Sparks, our Director of Transit Planning, and Dan Sonnenklar, who is another statewide transit planning manager here at DRPT. So they will be walking you through today's workshop, but as always, feel free to ask any questions, and if there's any technical assistance, feel free to either message myself or Mary Olivia as needed. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Grant Sparks to cover today's agenda. Grant?
All right. Thank you, Tiffany. And good morning, everyone. As Tiffany mentioned, my name is Grant Sparks. I'm the Director of Transit Planning here at DRPT. And we have a lot of ground to cover this morning. So we'll start off, I guess, with just an agenda, and I'll walk you through what we plan on covering today. If you have any detailed questions that are specific to your agency or a specific project that you're working on, we are more than happy to chat with you after this webinar just to talk through any specifics about your project or your agency. So as always, I know Tiffany mentioned this already, but please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. So just starting at the top here of the workshop agenda, we'll start off just going over some of the incentives for even applying or considering applying for federal discretionary funding. We do have some new incentives that we wanted to bring to everyone's attention, so I'll cover those. We'll then switch gears a little bit and dive into the discretionary program basics. On this workshop, we are specifically discussing FTA's Buses and Bus Facilities program, as well as their LONO program. So I wanted to make that clear from the get-go. So in that section of the workshop, we will start off by just going over the NOFO, or the Notice of Funding. Some of this will be refresher information for agencies or individuals who have applied for federal discretionary grants before. So we'll go over the basics of NOFOs. I will cover just the basics of navigating grants.gov. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. We have had some debriefs with FTA over the years on the Buses and Bus Facilities program, as well as the LONO program. So we'll give you an overview of what's been funded through those programs in the past, the deadlines for those programs this year, what FTA is generally looking for in terms of projects. And so we'll cover all of that information in that section. And then I'll finish off my section with covering some of the DRPT grant writing technical assistance opportunities that we provide to our transit agencies, specifically going over project development, any help with grant writing, helping review narratives, as well as helping with letters of support. At that point, I'll pass it off to Dan Sonnenklar, and he will walk the group through some tips of how to build a competitive application. Specifically, he'll cover FTA's evaluation approach. He will discuss some of the prerequisites to these two federal discretionary programs. He'll talk about the current administration's priorities and the supplemental form, which is probably the most important part of developing your application. That's the actual form where the content is developed. And then he'll go over some other considerations. And Tiffany mentioned this, we do plan on taking questions on the fly, but we will also try to leave some time at the end if there's a discussion needed or if we can answer any other questions. So starting off here with why apply for federal discretionary funds. So as I mentioned, there are some new incentives for applying to the discretionary grant programs offered by FTA. The first one here on the screen, discretionary funds allow limited funding for transit to go further. Kind of speaks for itself. There's never enough funding for public transportation, so securing federal discretionary funding often allows agencies to preserve other sources of funds, whether that be local, state, or even federal formula funds to be used for another purpose. And with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, these discretionary programs received an incredible uplift in their authorized funding amounts. So there's a lot of money out there in these two discretionary grant programs. And if it's not going to go to you guys, it's going to go to someone else, another agency across the country. Second one here, a win for a Virginia transit agency actually benefits every agency in the Commonwealth. Because DRPT's Merit Capital Grant Program has a discrete amount of funding that's allocated each year, whenever a transit agency in Virginia gets a federal discretionary grant from FTA, that almost always saves our state dollars and thus allows those dollars to go to other transit projects across the state. So what that basically means is if you're a transit agency and you apply for a capital project, we have our prioritization process, and we have to draw the line somewhere where we cannot fund any more projects. If your project is right there on the line and not in our funding scenario, if one of the projects that is in the funding scenario gets awarded federal discretionary funding, that will free up that additional state funding and allow us to go deeper down into our prioritization list. So we all need to be rooting for each other in this space as well. A benefit that agencies probably don't think about until after they receive an award is that oftentimes they receive positive media coverage. We've heard from Senator Kaine and Senator Warner's offices that they are eager to promote any of these funds that are awarded to Virginia agencies. And then also, of course, DRPT is happy to promote any awards as well. So if you are awarded, don't be surprised if you get some positive media coverage and some outreach from both us and the senators' offices. And then the big ones here down at the bottom, the new incentives this year are possibly the most encouraging for transit agencies to apply. DRPT staff have worked closely with the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee, or TSDAC, and the CTB to develop a new policy that allows for a reduced local match requirement on any project that receives federal discretionary funding. Previously, agencies were required to provide a minimum 4% local match on all capital projects under the Merit Capital Program. But now DRPT has the ability to reduce that percentage. So the last bullet point here, to operationalize this new policy, DRPT will set aside state capital funding each year out of the Merit Capital Program, which can be used as leveraged funding or match funding on discretionary applications. So, so this should be a big incentive for you guys, and we've actually provided some examples of what that would look like. So, so here's the first example. This project is an urban project. to replace 10 buses for a total cost of $5.5 million. The table on the top here, this is the typical match breakdown for this type of project. We typically get a 68% state match request. That's the maximum amount that the state can participate in. If it's an agency outside of Northern Virginia, I know the Northern Virginia agencies don't have access to federal 5307, but if they do, then we typically see a 28% match rate from the feds, and then there's a 4% local match on that project. The table on the bottom shows how the exact same project would be funded through a federal discretionary grant. There are some exemptions to this, but typically the buses and bus facilities program, as well as the Low-No program, come with a federal match of 80%. So under this scenario, the state share, as you can see, goes from 68% down to 18% with a pretty significant cost savings. And then the local match rate goes from a 4% down to a 2%, which has a cost savings as well. I did want to note that that 2% local match rate is just an example. While we have been thinking that the reduced rate would be 2%, we do have some flexibility there. There's nothing in CTB policy or state code that dictates a specific match rate for those local projects, so or for the local match requirement. So we do have some flexibility there, and depending on the project and how much money we have available, we could potentially go even lower than that. So next, this is the second example project. This is a facility replacement or renovation project, which could be in an urban or a rural area for a total cost of $10 million. So if you're familiar with our Merit Capital program, if it's a $10 million project, then that triggers a major expansion project, and that comes with a max state share of 50%. So the percentages change a little bit on this top table. And again, typically we see agencies come in for, again, 50% state funding. They're able to cover 46% of the costs with their federal funding. And then there's the 4% local match requirement. Under this new policy, if that project is awarded federal discretionary funding, again, we typically see 80% from the feds. The state match rate goes from 50% down to 18%. And just like the last project, the local match rate would go from 4% down to 2%. All right. So those are the incentives, or some of the incentives, for applying for federal discretionary funding. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and start going through some of the program basics of the Buses and Bus Facilities program, as well as the Low-No program. So, so the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or the NOFO, is the official announcement of a grant program. And FTA simultaneously begins accepting applications after the NOFO is posted. NOFOs can be found on the FTA website, as well as grants.gov, which is the federal government's official website for receiving federal discretionary grants. Be aware that grants.gov also includes many other federal agency programs. It is not just for FTA. It is not just for USDOT. So there are a lot of grant programs posted on grants.gov, so you will need to navigate to the programs in which you intend to apply for. NOFOs are important to carefully read before developing an application because it gives key information about the program. Listed on the screen here in the bullet points, NOFOs include the grant program summary. It describes project eligibility. It describes the match requirements, any specific application requirements. It covers the selection process, so how FTA makes decisions. It also has the FTA contact information for the individual who is responsible for administering those programs. And then it also describes the submission process, which has to be done in grants.gov for federal discretionary grants. Both the buses and bus facilities program, as well as the Lono program, those NOFOs were both announced and released on January 27th. So FTA is currently accepting applications to both of those programs. And then the last bullet point here, there is a new requirement for FTA to post the NOFO for buses and bus facilities as well as Lono within 30 days of a full federal budget approval. This is a subtlety that I don't think a lot of people have realized, but if you track what's going on in the federal government with regards to their federal budget each year, you will be able to anticipate when FTA plans on announcing these two programs. So you might hear in the national news that or not FTA, that Congress has passed a continuing resolution, which essentially is a stopgap budget bill to fund the federal government through a certain date until Congress and ultimately the president signs a full year federal budget bill, then you're just going to keep seeing continuing resolutions. But once that full federal budget bill is approved and signed by the president into law, that starts the 30-day window for which FTA has to post the NOFO for these programs. So I guess just keep an eye on the national news if you're interested in this. When you hear that the president has signed a full federal budget bill, then you will know that the NOFOs for these two programs will be forthcoming. So now just going into grants.gov, I know that our urban agencies who receive federal funds are used to applying to those FTA formula grants through TRAMS. Grants.gov is totally different platform. And again, this is where FTA and other federal agencies receive discretionary grant applications. Candidly, I would say that the process to apply in grants.gov isn't very intuitive. So if you intend on applying and you can't figure it out, just can't figure out how to navigate the website or whatever, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we can help walk you through it. So that being said, the basic steps to apply in grants.gov are listed here on this slide. First and foremost, your agency must have an active registration in grants.gov. That registration process isn't too terribly time consuming, but your agency needs to have an account. Once you have an account, you can log in and you will need to search for the grant program that you wish to apply for. You can see here on the screen, there's a search bar at the top of grants.gov, the homepage. If you type in buses and bus facilities or Lono and then click enter, those programs will be the first ones to pop up on the list. You can also type in the opportunity number, which is listed on this slide in that search bar, and that program will come up. There will then be a prompt which asks if you want to apply for that program. And so if you want to apply, you obviously click that button, and then it will ask you to create a workspace. A workspace is essentially an area in grants.gov where you can collaborate with others in your agency on developing the application. So you can assign individuals from your agency different roles. They can be just like a reviewer, they can be an editor, they can be a submitter. There are different roles that grants.gov allows. Or if it's just one person doing everything, you can just work on it yourself in the workspace, but you will have to create a workspace. Once that workspace is created, you then have 3 required documents that you have to submit in your application. And I don't even think grants.gov allows you to submit if you don't submit these three documents. The first one is the SF-424 form. This is a form that is just basic information about your agency. basic information about your project that you wish to apply for. So it'll ask for a high-level budget. There are a few other things that it will ask for, but it's really just basic information, and your project will not be evaluated on the SF-424 form. But you do need to accurately fill out the SF-424 form in order to be considered. The second document that you must fill out is the lobbying form. This is essentially just a checkbox form that certifies that no federal funds have been used for lobbying purposes. So you'll need to have an accountable executive sign off on that. And then the last form that needs to be submitted in your package is the attachments form. In the attachments form, this is where it gets a little complicated. You must attach the supplemental form to the attachments form. The attachments form allows up to 15 attachments. The supplemental form has to be one of them. So really you have 14 other attachments that you can include as part of your application. Usually those attachments are letters of support. It could be like a TDP or a TSP that references the project that you're applying for. It could be your capital improvement program. It could be any other planning document that justifies the need for your project. So if you want to attach your MPO's long-range plan, or really anything else that helps support your project, you can attach in the attachments form. Another one that we often see for specific for facility projects, you can attach renderings or drawings, engineering documents of your facility project. Those are all acceptable. You can also consolidate your attachments. So if you have, say, 20 letters of support, we would encourage you to consolidate that into one letters of support attachment to just give you more space to attach other files. But again, I want to stress that the supplemental form, which is really the meat of your application, must be an attachment in that attachments form. So where do you find the supplemental form? When you're in grants.gov and you are under the grant program that you wish to apply for, you'll see this is what you'll see on your screen. There is a related documents tab. So if you click on that related documents tab, you will then be able to download the supplemental form. And this is the form where applicants are required to describe the need for the project, the anticipated benefits of the project, and other required information. Upon submission, applicants should include the supplemental form as an attachment. I've said that a number of times, but we've seen a number of agencies get tripped up on this, so I wanted to just emphasize that. What does the supplemental form look like? If you are not filling out this form that you see on my screen, then please let us know because we can help you navigate to it. But this is a copy of the supplemental form for this year. So again, it's a PDF, a fillable PDF form. You download it from the grants.gov website, and that's where you will do 99% of the work. So just some general tips on navigating grants.gov. We would strongly encourage you to create a workspace in grants.gov immediately. That way you can confirm that everything in grants.gov is working properly. So in order to create a workspace, you will need to have an active grants.gov account, and your agency will need to have an active registration. So once you're able to create a workspace, you know that you are ready to go. Also determine which staff have the permissions to submit an application and notify them in advance. We've seen in the past that a former CFO or a former CEO is currently listed as the only individual in an agency that can submit an application, and the agency just hasn't refreshed that. And if you don't recognize that until the day before submission or the day of submission, then you're going to run into some problems and potentially it'll limit your ability to apply. And then the last one here, submit your application a couple days before the deadline, if at all possible, to avoid technical glitches. FTA strongly encourages this. I think they've had some issues in the past where grants.gov has actually gone down on the submission day or even the day before submission for whatever reason. And when that happens, they do not extend the deadline of the application. So if at all possible, submit your application a couple days before the deadline to avoid that scenario. All right, so that's grants.gov. Now we're going to move into some of the basics of the buses and bus facilities program, as well as the LONO program. Starting with the buses and bus facilities program on the left here, there are three overarching types of projects that are eligible. Facility rehab or construction projects. These are usually maintenance facilities, but they could also be transfer centers. Second one, bus replacement or expansion projects. The type of bus replacement or expansion does not matter. It could be an electric bus, it could be a CNG bus, hybrid, diesel, gas, whatever, does not matter under the buses and bus facilities program. And then the third eligible type of project is related equipment. This could be hardware for new technology. It could be charging infrastructure for electric buses. It could be bus stop infrastructure. While these are eligible types of projects, we would not advise an agency to just apply for equipment. There are very, very few projects that are selected each year that are just equipment. It's literally just one or two projects out of hundreds of projects that are applied for. So those aren't usually the most competitive projects under this program. So you'd really have to have a pretty compelling case in order for it to just be an equipment project. Moving to the right here, LONO. This program supports pretty much everything that the buses and bus facilities program does, with the exception of diesel and gas vehicle projects. So low and no emissions projects, FTA classifies zero or no emission buses as battery electric or hydrogen. They classify low emission buses as CNG, hybrid, or propane, and then also supporting facilities. So if it's a facility that will be will have all the infrastructure to accommodate electric vehicle charging or propane fueling or whatever, they may be considered under the LONO program as well. Also, equipment, I mentioned earlier, charging infrastructure is also eligible under this program. So those were the eligible project types. This is moving to eligible applicants for these programs. FTA mentions these in their notice of funding or their NOFO. FTA designated recipients are eligible, states are eligible, local government authorities are eligible, as well as tribes. I've made a note here at the very bottom. All rural applications must be submitted by the state or DRPT. And there's a subtlety with this one. In the NOFO, it does not say that rural agencies, so it's not 5311 agencies, their applications must be submitted by the state. It's rural projects. And that distinction I wanted to point out because we do have at least a couple agencies in Virginia that operate service in both urban and rural areas. And so if it's buses to support rural transit, that would have to be applied for by DRPT. But if it's buses, obviously, to support in an urbanized area, then that does not have to be submitted by DRPT. So it really depends on the nature of the project and whether or not it's an urban project or a rural project. Match requirements, I mentioned this earlier on. Almost always the feds have a 80% max federal share on their capital projects. There are a couple exemptions to that. I believe projects that are intended to comply with ADA and/or the Clean Air Act are eligible for a larger federal share. I haven't seen a ton of agencies take advantage of that, and I'm not entirely sure why. Probably need to do some follow up with FTA on that. But again, typically the maximum match rate from the feds is 80%. They do allow in-kind match as allowable, but that is typically reserved for facilities. So almost always the in-kind match is the value of the land for a facility project. So if the transit agency or the city is using land that they already own and there's no federal interest in that land, they may use the value of that land as an in-kind match. There are some specific requirements for in-kind match. So if your agency intends on utilizing that provision, please reach out to us so we can help with that. So just some other important requirements here. The first bullet point on this slide, applications for both the buses and bus facilities and low-no programs are due on April 13th. Applications may be submitted to both programs, but a separate application package in grants.gov will be needed for each. We have heard that FTA actually encourages applications to both the buses and bus facilities program as well as the low-no program if there is dual eligibility. So for example, if you have a CNG bus replacement project, just as an example, that CNG bus replacement project is eligible under low-no. It's also eligible under buses and bus facilities. They're the exact same match rates. There's no difference between the two, but you will essentially get two swings by submitting to both programs. But you will essentially have to have two supplemental forms, two workspaces created in grants.gov, and basically do all of the work twice in order to be considered for both of those programs. So I wanted to point that out.
Hey, Grant, we just got
Sure.
a question into the chat. It came from Raymond over at Dash. Do you know if FTA would split a combined project applied to both bus and bus facilities and low-no and apply separate components to each program?
I think FTA, I could be wrong here, Raymond, but I thought I have heard FTA actually do that. I would encourage you to submit the full project under both programs and then let FTA, if they want to split out, 3/4 of the project to be funded by low-no and then 1/4 by buses and bus facilities, they can do that. And I'm fairly confident that last year they did that on at least a couple projects, and they were facility projects. So yeah, I'm fairly confident that FTA will do that. So and thank you for that question, Raymond. So the third bullet point here, FTA, this is again a new requirement. FTA must announce awards for the buses and bus facilities and low-no programs no later than June 27th, 2023. There's a new provision. I think this was passed by Congress, but FTA has to make awards for these programs within 75 days of applications being closed. So if you do the math, 75 days after April 13th is June 27th. So that at least gives us a good idea of when we will hear from FTA on their award decisions. And then the last section here at the bottom, special requirements for these programs. There is a minimum 25% of the LONO program funding must go to low emission projects. And again, the low emission projects are defined as CNG, propane, or hybrid projects. We have heard from FTA that they did not get a ton of these applications last year. And so almost all of the CNG replacement projects or propane or hybrid were actually funded. And so if you currently operate CNG, propane, or hybrid, or want to operate CNG, propane or hybrid vehicles, we strongly encourage you to submit a LONO application because FTA is required to allocate a minimum 25% of their funding to those types of projects. Second bullet point here, a minimum of 5% of the LONO projects project budgets must include workforce development activities. So this is identified in the NOFO as agencies are developing their LONO applications. 5% of the funding in their budgets for that project must be dedicated to workforce development activities. FTA has very loosely defined workforce development activities. The only thing that they've really said is a good type of workforce development activity is training. So obviously, with battery electric buses in particular, if you're transitioning your fleet to battery electric bus, there's a whole lot of training that operators, mechanics, even administrative staff need to go through. So that's really what that is dedicated for. All LONO projects must include a zero emission or a low emission fleet transition plan. So this was a new requirement, I think either last year or the year before. You have to have a transition plan. There are 6 required elements in that transition plan that FTA is looking for. But understanding that smaller agencies aren't going to have as a robust of a transition plan as a very large agency, FTA recognizes that. But we are happy to help with your transition plan if you need one. But Dan's going to go into a little bit more detail on the transition plan when it's his turn to present. And then the last bullet point, a minimum of 15% of the buses and bus facilities funding must go to rural projects. So while CNG, propane, and hybrid projects are very competitive under the LONO program, rural projects are pretty competitive under the buses and bus facilities program because FTA has that minimum 15% requirement. All right, so just a few more slides from me. This is just a Buses and Bus Facilities 101. This is kind of a recap of FY22 and the funding that was provided by FTA under this program. They received 282 buses and bus facilities applications last year for a total of $3.7 billion in requested funding. Out of the 282 applications, FTA was able to fund 50 projects, or 18%, for a total of $551 million. And that's federal funding. So as you can see, this program, and you'll see with LONO too, it is pretty competitive. It is far from a given if you are applying for these programs. You have to spend a good bit of time making your case on why the project is a good project and why you need the funding. In terms of the award size, we calculated the average award size to be $11 million under this program. but there was a very, very wide range of projects funded. The smallest project funded under buses and bus facilities last year was $115,000, and the largest award was $54 million. So a very, very wide range there. In terms of the breakdown of urban versus rural, 65% of the projects went to large urban agencies. 12% of the projects or funding rather went to small urban agencies, and then 23% went to rural agencies. This year in FY23, $460 million is available under the buses and bus facilities program. So this is a breakdown of the different projects that were funded last year under buses and bus facilities. Again, it was 50 projects were selected. As you can see here, the largest chunk of projects were actually facility projects. 38% were operations and maintenance facilities. The second most popular project funded were for battery electric buses and charging equipment. This was a deviation from previous administrations. Previous administrations had kind of used the buses and bus facilities program to support gas and diesel bus replacements. Starting with FY22, the new administration is clearly emphasizing low and no emission vehicle replacements and expansions. So to see this 28% figure here for battery electric buses and associated charging equipment was a big change. Moving to the purple and the green, those are the gas and diesel buses that were funded last year. So I guess doing the math, only 10 projects, gas and diesel bus replacements or expansions were funded last year. So not a lot. Then the smaller ones, there were some CNG buses, some just charging infrastructure projects, a transfer center, and then a kind of an oddball in here, solar panels and battery electric bus training. There was one project for that was awarded funding last year. So for Lono, similar kind of rundown here. There were 248 applications to the Lono program for a total of $4 billion in requested federal funding. FTA funded 100 projects, so 40%, for a total of $1.1 billion in federal funds. The exact same average award size here for Lono, it was $11 million. And similar to buses and bus facilities, there was a wide range. The lowest or the smallest funded project was $167,000, and the largest project was $116 million. So huge range there. And then somewhat of a similar funding distribution, although a larger share went to urban agencies. You can see here that large urban agencies accounted for 84% of the funding distribution. Small urban agencies accounted for 12%, and then rurals accounted for 6%. And then for FY23, there's even more Lono funding available, and it's $1.22 billion. So here's the breakdown of types of projects funded under Lono last year. Over half were battery electric buses, which probably is not surprising to anyone. Hybrid electric buses actually was a strong share here. 14 projects were hybrid electric buses were funded. 14 CNG bus projects were funded. 9 hydrogen fuel cell bus projects were funded. And then there were a handful of propane bus projects, an operation and maintenance facility. There were 3 of those, and then electric vans were also funded. All right, so I guess just wrapping up here with what we can do to help you guys develop your applications. We are available to assist all transit agencies in Virginia with the development of their discretionary grant applications. We are happy to do whatever you guys need from us, whether that be to just walk through the grants.gov process, getting your agency registered in grants.gov, creating a workspace. We can help you walk through that process, and if you need nothing else, that's totally fine. We're also available to help your agency identify viable and competitive projects. We have had a number of discussions with FTA, so we feel like we have a pretty good idea of what they're looking for. So we're happy to kind of help you think through what projects make the most sense for your agency. We'd also be glad to help you work through your budgets as well as developing a narrative. Dan will cover this here in a second, but the narrative development is really the key to your application. I've heard from FTA time and time again that it's really about storytelling. What makes your bus replacement project more compelling than an agency in another state's bus replacement project? That's essentially what it comes down to, and that's what FTA will be evaluating. So try to think of your compelling local story on why you really need that bus replacement or facility replacement or whatever the project is. You have to come up with some fairly unique and compelling storylines. But we would be happy to help kind of think through all of that with you guys. If you're applying for Lono specifically and you don't have a transition plan, or you have a little bit of the transition plan, but you need help finalizing that, we're happy to help with that as well. The final application review and feedback before submission here. We really want to see applications before they're submitted, just so if there's any state funding that's being leveraged in your project budgets, we certainly want to be aware of that. But also, we're just happy to look at your applications and provide any feedback. You don't have to use the feedback, but we've been through a number of these applications in the past, so we'd just be happy to provide any feedback that we have. And then, of course, letters of support is the last one here. Director DeBrule is happy to provide a letter of support from DRPT. The Secretary of Transportation is also happy to provide a letter of support, but you need to request it to us. So please, if you know you are applying for funding, please notify us, and we would be happy to get those letters of support over to you so you can attach them in your application package. That was a lot. I'm going to just quickly pause if you guys have any questions about the information that I just covered before I hand it over to Dan.
As a reminder, you can feel free to enter your questions in the chat or raise your hand and either myself or Mary Olivia can unmute. As of right now, there are no questions.
All right. Well, again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to either myself, Dan, Tiffany, or your DRPT program manager, and we'd be happy to set up a chat with you. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Dan, and Dan, you can start sharing your screen.
All righty. Bear with me, please, as I do this. All right, can somebody give me an indication that my screen is being shared or not?
You're good to go.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Sonnenklar. I am a statewide transit planning manager here with DRPT, and I am going to be walking you through a number of slides here that are geared towards giving advice on how to build a competitive application in DRPT's mind. So this is kind of DRPT's approach to building federal discretionary applications. And as Grant mentioned, we'll be fielding questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to type them in. Also, I guess to get this a little bit more interactive, if you do know that your agency is going to be applying for a specific grant, if you want to type in your agency's name and what type of grant and what the project is, that would kind of help us also just have an idea about what you all are thinking. So a general note here. And just can somebody please confirm that my slides are advancing?
You're good.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, a general note here on organization of the elements of an application. So we generally recommend that you approach your application and various attachments in a standard way across the board. Attachment 1 should always be the official supplemental form PDF, which with all sections filled out. Now, this form is also built in with some validation normally, so if you're missing any key information, it should prompt you with an error message as you save that file. Attachment 2 here is something that DRPT does in all of our discretionary applications. We create what we call a designed version of the supplemental form. So this is really a word layout document saved in a PDF that includes all of the questions and answers that are included in the supplemental form, but it's laid out in a more reader-friendly way. And that way, if those at FTA are reading through the application, and they would like a bit more of a friendly approach to it, they can read through that form. That document, though, should stick to the character limits of the supplemental form and should really not include additional narrative. Additional narrative can be included in additional attachments beyond what that designed version would have. But a few additional graphics and photos could be included, and things like tables can be presented in a bit more of a aesthetically pleasing way. But again, we recommend not going beyond much beyond what is included in that supplemental form in such a document. And then finally, any additional attachments, you're allowed up to 15 total. So taking into account the first 2 attachments, you'll have 13 additional attachments that you can upload. And we do recommend that you combine certain elements. So for planning and local or regional and local planning support, you can kind of attach all of those as one combined file together. But so these additional attachments include letters of support, which are highly recommended, and FTA is definitely looking for in every single application that comes through these programs. And then the other ones that we included here are optional. They include things like multimedia, photos, and videos that illustrate elements of the project or the needs that the project will satisfy. And detailed budget sheets are also optional if you want to go beyond what the simple tables in the supplemental application allow for. And then, of course, extended narratives on any topics with short character counts in that supplemental form, we do encourage you all to include as an additional attachment. Now, there is no guarantee that FTA will read those additional narratives, but they could help provide some additional information should they read through all of them. So over the next 4 slides here, I'm going to be going over what we understand to be FTA's evaluation approach for these 2 programs. And so these are from notes that we've gathered from various feedback sessions that we've had with FTA officials and additional offline kind of conversations that we've had with people at conferences and places like that. So really the main evaluation criteria, which are addressed in section 3 of the supplemental form, are the main criteria that FTA is looking at to determine whether a project is recommended or not. And so this includes the demonstration of benefits, the demonstration of need, planning and local and regional prioritization of the project, local financial commitments, project implementation, and then this technical, legal, and financial ability to implement the project. Within that system, they have an overall rating system of either considering a project to be highly recommended, recommended, or not recommended overall. And with competitive programs like these, all applications that we're submitting from the state of Virginia should aim for highly recommended across the board. And the way that they assign the overall rating is they're looking at the rating for each of these criteria areas. So a project will receive a highly recommended overall rating if at least 4 criteria receive individual ratings of highly recommended. Alternatively, a project will only receive not recommended in the case that it scores 1 score of not recommended for a criteria area. So if there's one area that is really lacking in an application, it will tank the entire application as not recommended. This past year, when we submitted a number of different grants throughout the state, I believe all of them received highly recommended, so we were doing a very good job with that. But many were still not selected for funding, and I'll go into that on the next couple of slides here. So with so many highly recommended projects, FTA also has to use these additional, what they call discretionary elements of the applications to choose which projects ultimately do get funded. And so those usually reflect administrative priorities, geographic diversity, diversity in the size of the transit systems applying, and whether an applicant has received prior awards. So when it comes to geographic diversity, FTA is looking on an annual basis to spread the awards out all over the country in all different kinds of areas. So there's not much that we can do to really control for that. In addition, your agency cannot really control for the size of the transit system. But one thing that you can keep in mind is whether or not you've received an award recently. So from what we have gathered, a future application may be slightly less competitive if your agency has received one of these awards in one of the past cycles. And so for staff planning and resource planning, it may be a better strategy to apply every other year for these projects. So in a competitive year, the impacts of the projects in each of those categories that I just mentioned will make the difference between receiving funding or not. In FY or federal fiscal year 22, 80% of all applications were considered highly recommended for those main evaluation criteria. So it really did come down to the secondary or discretionary elements that I mentioned here. So some specific secondary criteria questions.
One moment, Dan. We're right
yes.
about 11 o'clock, and so I know we promised people about a 5-minute break. So I know you just got started and we're eager to hear what you have to say, but perhaps we'll take 5 minutes and have everyone come back at around 11:06.
Sure. All right. It is 11:06, so let's get back into it. All right, so what I was talking about was the secondary criteria that FTA uses when evaluating these applications, and those are listed out here. They're climate change impacts, full fleet transition, creation of good paying jobs, procurement methods, zero emissions transition plans, and a section called Justice 40, which has raised a lot of questions. So we'll get into a lot of that today. A note here as well, FTA has reorganized and streamlined the application for fiscal year 23. So please be sure to download a new supplemental form when developing your application. There are some new questions in there, and there's some new tools that you will be required to use as well. So I just wanted to repeat here that no matter what, it's important to fill out all sections of the application as completely and thoroughly as possible. FTA looks at the application as a whole when making a funding determination, so please don't leave any applicable sections blank. And I say applicable because some of the sections in the application, in the supplemental form, only apply to either bus and bus facilities or LONO. LONO has many more requirements within the document, so please do not leave any sections blank. So section 1 of the application, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because all of these are pretty self-explanatory. It's just very important to make sure that this information is accurate and up to date. There is an opportunity here within one section here, the description of services provided and areas provided in area service. Sorry, areas. I'm sorry, there's a typo here. It's service areas. We do recommend here taking the opportunity to spend some time describing your communities and how transit serves that community. We do recommend it here because the rest of the application should really focus on the project being applied for and its benefits and the needs that it is addressing. So if there's any narrative regarding the community, this is where it should go. So section 2 now only includes one section called About the Project, which includes a series of questions that are included here on the next slide. Project title, executive summary, propulsion type, and project type. Now, each of these questions are relatively straightforward as well, but be sure to be concise and describe exactly what the project will do to leave nothing open for interpretation. And for the title, we recommend creating something short but descriptive that allows the reviewers to understand what the project is. For facilities, it is helpful to include the name of the facility, if it has one, in the title of the application. So then moving on to section 3, this is where the bulk of the evaluation criteria and the time should be spent on the application. It includes all of those 6 areas that I just mentioned that are judged as either highly recommended, recommended, or not recommended, which includes the demonstration of need, demonstration of benefits, planning and local and regional prioritization, local financial commitment, which now includes the project budget and scalability as part of it, project implementation, which now includes the timeline and partnership provision as part of it, and the technical, legal, and financial capability of your agency. And so this is where I would concentrate the majority of my efforts in developing an application this round. So just getting into each of these sections, and I guess I'll go over this, and I should have mentioned this a moment ago. The way that these slides are organized is at the top of the slide in black, you will find what is included in the application as far as questions go. And then when there's a gray background, those are notes, DRPT notes on recommendations and kind of guidance on how to address that section. And so the rest of the presentation is organized in that manner. And I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier. So within these first few sections are really the opportunity to do what Grant had mentioned and develop a story around your project. So it's really important here to develop a concise and compelling narrative that demonstrates the unmet need that the project will fulfill. So for example, and these are examples that we've heard directly from FTA that they're looking for, current safety needs that will be addressed by the project can be described here. Assets being at or beyond their useful life and needing replacements, the need for equipment to electrify, and addressing agency and community needs as well should be developed here. It's key here to include enough information and documentation of the project and the needs. And this is really where multimedia files can really help bolster your application. So any photographs, videos, or other media that illustrates the needs addressed by the project can really go a long way. So as we noted before, you can include these as attachments and include references within the narrative to those attachments. So an example of this is if you're replacing old vehicles, if you are able to take pictures of parts of those old vehicles that are run down or in need of repair, that can really go a long way in developing a story around your application.
Hey, Dan,
Yes.
one quick note on, and you might actually be getting into this, but on the demonstration of need. Oh, sorry, I thought I froze up. On the demonstration of need, wherever you can quantify something, like if the current vehicles that are past their useful life are resulting in, mechanical failures every, X amount of days or X amount of miles, which is then, limiting, the availability of service. Like those are also things that you should try to highlight in this section. It'll just help support, the application.
Thank you, Grant. And yeah, I will get a little bit into that on this slide as well. So for vehicles, Characteristics of the vehicles to be replaced and the vehicles to be purchased should be highlighted. For example, if buses are in a state of good repair, it's hard to attract riders, so the new vehicles will help attract riders. Provide enough backup documentation to evaluate where replacement vehicles are in their useful life. So this is backup documentation that shows the in-service dates and the mileage of your vehicles that are coming up for replacements. To Grant's point, any data on the maintenance frequency, failures, or various other metrics that you use to track a vehicle throughout its useful life that illustrate operational difficulties can really do a lot to help tell that story as well. Now, a note here that FTA does favor the replacement of vehicles that have already reached their useful life. Okay, so knowing that it takes time to order vehicles, especially these days, is taken into account in the project implementation section, but this response can speak to that, but it really is not prioritized when comparing to other applications. So FTA is really looking to replace those vehicles that are currently beyond their useful life. Now, for facilities, we recommend including characteristics of the facility to be built and to be replaced, or the additions to the facility that will address a need or a deficiency of the current facility, and to include enough backup documentation to evaluate where that asset also is in its useful life. Now, facilities have much longer useful lives than vehicles. I believe the standard facility, admin maintenance facility useful life is 40 years. And so we are not certain if your facility needs to be right at or beyond the 40-year mark. If you are approaching that within 38 or 39 years, we would still recommend applying for this program.
One other note, Dan, on
Yep.
specifically on the vehicle, well, really vehicles or facilities in the demonstration of need area. Every transit agency that receives federal funds is now, required to either produce their own transit asset management plan or be part of a group transit asset management plan. And so this is another thing that you can highlight in this section on how your project supports your agency's transit asset management plan. Because it's a FTA requirement, they do like to see, how these projects support those important initiatives that they've put out there. So just another thing to highlight.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to the next section, which is the demonstration of benefits. You will first be asked if this is an application to the Low-No program, which is a yes, no. And if it's an application to the Bus and Bus Facilities program, also yes, no. And to then please describe the benefits of the proposed project per the statutory requirements for each of those programs. So if you do select both, you are required to answer a demonstration of benefits for both programs, not just one combined. So again, here we want to develop a concise and compelling narrative demonstrating the benefits of the project once implemented. And so this is another opportunity to really work on your storytelling about that project. As I mentioned, if you're applying to one program, you'll only need to provide one response. If you're applying to both, you will need to provide separate responses for each. In addition, this should be different from the description of needs, but can address the needs that are highlighted. So we recommend including quantitative and qualitative information that address those needs to address improvements to system conditions overall when the project is implemented, and to address access and mobility benefits of the project once it's implemented as well. And again, these are specific notes that we heard from FTA as to what they're looking for in these applications. For Low-No applications specifically, be sure to illustrate clear emissions reduction benefits here, as well as other places throughout the application where you are asked. The third section within the evaluation criteria is the planning and local and regional prioritization. So this section should refer to all relevant local, regional, and statewide planning documents that either mention the project or are consistent with project goals. So even if the project isn't mentioned specifically, If there's overall planning goals that are supported by implementing the project, we recommend including those here. So excerpts of entire sections that are relevant can be included as attachments. And again, here, as I mentioned earlier, we do recommend tying all of those attachments into one additional document as to not overload the reviewers with multiple attachments, and to also stay within the 15 attachment limit. Another key piece here is the letters of support from local, regional, and state entities that are responsible for the planning and decision making for the project. So it's extremely important in the evaluation, and we do recommend getting as many as possible and getting those early. The state must provide a letter of support for any applications involving state aid. So please let us know early in the process so we can be sure to get this into our work plan. A recommendation here is that so we've seen some agencies do this, and this is what we would do as well, is we would provide a template of a letter of support to send to partners and a 1-page or even a half a page description of the project. That makes it really easy on your supporting local, regional, and state government entities or partners to fill out and sign a letter of support for the plan. And any entity that is responsible in whole or in part for funding the project should be included on this list. Okay, so a few more specific notes here for low-no applications. So as Grant mentioned a moment ago, a transition plan is necessary in order to qualify for the low-no program. And so in this section, please be sure to reference your agency's transition plan and include it as an attachment. So transition plans, according to the FTA, must include 6 elements. So even if they're not a full transition plan, it's a partial transition plan, they will be looking for all 6 of these areas. Okay, so the first is fleet management plan and strategy. The second is the financial resource availability to implement low and no emissions fleets, policy and legislative impacts of going low or no emissions, facility evaluations, utility and fuel partnerships, and workforce impacts. And so it's key to note here that transition plans that are missing one or more of these elements will score lower in the evaluation of this section. And I know for as far as the utility and fuel partnerships go, we are aware and we know, and we've worked with Dominion, who is a great partner in this, and they're willing to provide letters of support that will go into these projects, but also to participate in any planning efforts that you're doing around utility improvements at your facilities.
And I guess, Dan, quickly to expand on that. So we also recognize that, not every transit agency in Virginia has Dominion as their utility provider. We are happy to help facilitate whatever conversations are needed with your designated utility provider. Dan mentioned Dominion, and he's right that they've been very active in this space, and they're more than willing to help support your application, certainly provide a letter of support. But for those outside of Dominion's territory, we're also able and willing to help facilitate those conversations.
Thank you, Red. So moving on to the local financial commitment section. So for all projects, FTA is looking for the ability to obligate funds as quickly as possible. So good documentation of local funds really does help provide evidence that the project can be implemented quickly. Evidence of an appropriate local match is important to provide here in narrative and through any additional attachments that identify the source of local funds, which in FTA's language, local funds can include state, regional, and local funding sources. We recommend here providing sufficient supporting documentation for this that has evidence that those funds are either already obligated or allocated to the project, evidence of account balances if necessary, or evidence of recurring funding, which could be historic funding levels for various local sources. Tying the local financial commitment narrative back to the overall application is also helpful to FTA when evaluating this section. So it's very easy when talking about just the finances of a project to strictly talk about the budget. But if you could talk about the budget and how this project is so key to addressing needs and providing benefits, that does help bolster this section a bit. So any assumed state funds that do not have programmed or that have not been programmed in the current SIP, we can provide some language on that state funding. So we do encourage you to include information on those state funds as well. So within the local financial commitment section, FTA has included the subsection on the project budget. Within that section, they ask for applicants to fill out a table, which includes descriptions of line items, quantities, the federal amount requested, the local amount match amounts, other federal funds used, other fund sources, and totals. And the totals are automatically calculated in that sheet. So as you can imagine, this is an extremely important piece of the application. So being as clear as possible is really helpful, and including additional attachments that expound upon any individual line item that you include here could also be helpful in demonstrating how you are funding the project. So the table in the supplemental form should be relatively high level. For vehicles, we recommend including a separate line item for each vehicle type. So if you're applying for 10 of the same type of vehicle, they can be included in one line item here. But if you're including various vehicle types in your application, they should be split out into separate line items. For facilities, the budgets at a minimum should be more detailed, but at a minimum need to include a separate line item for large elements of the project, such as construction or phases of the project that are going into the ultimate implemented project. But you can use your discretion here, and also, like I said, include additional attachments at the end of the application. So a note here that in years past, FTA prioritized projects that were overmatched, but that was really not the case in FY22, and we don't anticipate it being the case moving forward. So overmatch, this is meaning that the local funds equaled more than 20% of the total, or more than the mandatory local match. So we do recommend now including up to the full 80% federal match in all applications. If state funds will be needed to support that project, again, please reach out to us and we'll provide you some language on that, and we'll talk about what our involvement can be. And as Grant mentioned earlier, we do now offer a lower minimum local match rate for projects supported by discretionary funds. And so please reach out early in that process to discuss that. And as always, and I've mentioned this a number of times, more complete project budgets can be included as additional attachments. And I have a couple other slides on additional project budget information here too. So the table, as I mentioned, should summarize a breakdown of federal, local, and other funds needed to support the subject project. Local funds, as I mentioned, in an FTA application refers to any matching funds for a project that are not federal. So that includes state, regional, and local funding. It's a bit of a misnomer that it says local, but please keep that in mind when developing these tables. If a project already has federal funds allocated, and this application is for additional federal funding, we recommend approaching this table following the bullets here at the bottom of the slide. So the federal amount should reflect the new federal funds being requested. The local match is the combination of all matching funds, state, regional, and local, to match that new federal. Other federal should be existing federal allocations on the project, and other should be existing matching funds from all sources, state, regional, and local. And on this next slide, we just give a brief example table that illustrates a project, a $15 million administrative and maintenance facility. And some characteristics of that project: that $10 million are already allocated through an 80-20 split of federal and 20 state and local. And this project needs $5 million in additional funding. of which 80 will come from the federal application and 20% will be local. And so the table below just outlines how you should fill out your application if you're finding yourself in this kind of situation. So the new amount, the total of $5 million between federal, which is 80% for $4 million, and the local amount of $1 million. And then since there's $10 million already on the project, 8 million of which come from federal, 8 would go into the other federal funds, and then the other would represent all of the state and local money that is currently on that project. So all of this is for a total of $15 million for the project. So this is just an example of how to parse out kind of complicated funding profiles for specifically for facility projects. Those are the ones that often need additional funds in future years. All right. So also within the section, there's some questions on project scalability. Really, they just ask if the project's scalable, yes, no, and if yes, what the minimum federal funds necessary would be to support that. And of course, they ask for a lengthy explanation. Excuse me. So project scalability only really comes into a play in FTA's review when they've already evaluated the project and they've decided to fund it, but they do not have enough funds available for all projects on that approved list. So what this means is your project is only evaluated once based on the needs and benefits of the project as a whole, and then scalability comes into play at the end of the allocation process, where various funding scenarios are considered, and FTA is really trying to work out where it can put its limited funds. In addition here, for this section, what you should include for the minimum federal funds necessary. So if there's multiple scalability options, this should represent new federal funding needed for the lowest cost version of the project included. And the explanation of the scalability should include a detailed breakdown of what would be included in the scaled down version, along with total costs and federal cost needs, that is. Okay. So within the project budget area as well, and I may have gotten the order a little bit mixed up here. I think this may come before the scalability sections. You're asked a few questions about workforce development activities or training, and for zero emissions projects, if the 5% of the project budget for workforce development training as outlined in the zero emissions transition plan is included. And so the NCI question, really that could be applicable for projects that include an element of training across the board. We haven't seen a project that has selected this, but if it would apply to you all, we would be happy to advise you on how to answer it. As far as the workforce development question, for bus and bus facilities projects, a simple no is fine here. But we have heard that including an answer to this could actually help make your application a bit more competitive in FTA's mind. For low no, of course, it's important that your transition plan and your application identify that 5% of the costs will go to project development or workforce development rather. So for particularly large projects, this may take a creative approach since 5% of a large project could be a lot of money. And again, DRPT is here to help you all think through this and your response to this on a case-by-case basis. So please indicate that you would like some support with this if you would need that.
Hey, Dan.
Yep.
We just got a question. Can you confirm if workforce development is 5% applied to the federal match only or the total project amount?
That's a good question. I believe it was the total project amount.
Yes.
I'm not sure if Grant has a different answer to that.
Yeah, it's the full project amount. So if your project is, $1 million, well, I'll just use the easy example, $100, then $5 needs to be for workforce development activities.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions, or is that the only one?
That was only one.
All right. So the next major section within the evaluation criteria is the project implementation strategy, which also includes a couple of subsections. The main question that is asked here is, can this project be obligated within 12 months? What we recommend you all do here is provide a narrative that summarizes the project timeline and major milestones with an eye on obligating the funds within 12 months. Now, obligating does not mean implemented. It does not mean complete. Obligating just means that the money is allocated or obligated to the project from all local and federal sources. So this section should include a narrative on key milestones and dates associated with them, but also demonstrate that any critical dependencies are addressed. So what I mean by critical dependencies are included in the bullets below. So this is board approvals needed, the inclusion in administrative documents like the TIP or the STIP, a description of the procurement process and timeline that's needed to implement the project. And so we noted here that we do have a state vehicle contract, which already is a federally compliant procurement document for vehicles. And so if your application is for vehicles, we do recommend noting that you will be using the state vehicle contract to purchase those if that's the case. In addition, it includes describing whether additional engineering and design is needed on the project, and if any environmental approvals are needed, like NEPA or CEQA. If environmental approvals are not needed on a facility project specifically, please articulate that and mention if a categorical exclusion is applicable to the project. In addition, in this section, we recommend highlighting any partnerships that are needed to implement the project throughout its life cycle. So as a subsection within the overall project implementation strategy is the timeline. The application asks for a timeline item description and timeline item date. And you can add a number of these in there. There's likely a limit on the number of timeline items. So the schedule should be detailed enough to understand the general parameters and milestones associated with the project, but does not need to include every single little step, especially for bigger, more complicated projects. The schedule, though, should demonstrate that the project funds can be fully obligated within 12 months. So within this whole section, that's a theme that should recur throughout, is that the narrative should make FTA comfortable with the fact that you can obligate all funds within 1 year of award. So within this section, there's also some questions regarding partnership provisions. What is asked here is this application a partnership between an eligible applicant and one or more partners? And so the partnership provision really only applies to low-no projects from what we can see. If a partner is named in the application, a recipient can avoid competitive bidding for the partner's services. So if you all know that you will be working with a specific vendor or contractor once the award is made, naming them here will keep you from having to go through a competitive bidding process. So the types of work that partners can do on these projects are operational analysis and planning, utility support and analysis also, and other pre-deployment analyses that are associated with launching low and no emissions vehicles and low and no emissions facilities. Now, a note here on DRPT assistance as well. Pre-development or deployment work can also utilize members of our bench contractors, which are already procured through our state contract. And so they don't necessarily need to be mentioned here in the application if you're planning on relying on the DRPT bench contractors to support this.
And Dan, if I could just quickly chime in on this
Please.
section as well. So I think one of the benefits to our Virginia transit agencies here is that we already have a state vehicle contract for both small vehicles as well as large vehicles. And then we also have, as Dan mentioned, a bench contract of qualified planning firms as well as engineering firms to help with some of those activities. So transit agencies obviously don't have to use those vehicles or any of those consultants for the work that they do. But if you do intend on using the state's vehicle contract, if you do intend on using any of our bench contractors, you should mention that in this section, because that would actually accelerate the timeline in theory, because you wouldn't have to go through procurement. And essentially you'd say we'd help help you craft your narrative here if you wanted help with it. But you would say that, that you don't need to identify partners in this provision because you already have access to a statewide vehicle contract or a statewide planning contract or something along those lines. But we're happy to help you with this section if you need it.
Great. Yeah, just please indicate if any sections that you would like help with. And I'm going to mention a form that was also distributed to grantees throughout the state that you all can fill out to let us know what kind of assistance you're interested in. So moving on to the last of the major evaluation criteria, the technical, legal, and financial capacity to implement the project. This section is judged on a pass-fail basis across the board. And so to obtain a passing score here, a few notes are included to reference in this narrative. So we do recommend referencing the triennial review, or the most recent triennial review by FTA that proves your technical, legal, and financial capacity to do this. In addition, it's important to demonstrate capacity to execute such a project by using past examples or various other explanations of resources that are available to your agencies to implement the project. It's not necessary to provide all 4,000 characters for this response, but please be sure to elaborate enough to adequately just demonstrate capacity across these three areas. Now, a note here also, if you've had any technical, legal, or financial issues in the management of previous federal grants, please describe how your organization has addressed and overcome those issues. And on this one, DRPT would be happy to help you address that as well. But I don't believe any of our agencies will be reaching out for help on this one. So that brings us to the end of the main evaluation criteria and to section 4, which in this year's application includes additional considerations. So within this additional considerations section, FTA has included questions regarding climate change, full fleet transition, creating good paying jobs, procurement methods that reduce customization, and zero emissions fleet transition plans, specifically workforce involvement questions, and Justice 40. And so in the next few slides, as we close out this webinar, I'm going to review these questions that are asked as well. So within the climate change section, the question has changed this time around, and FTA has included just the two that are included here. So is this application requesting 20 or more zero emissions 40-foot buses, yes or no? And then the second piece is that applicants must input the amount of reductions per vehicle from the FY 2023 bus and low emissions reduction calculator. And so the first thing to note here is that with all of these additional considerations questions, they have very short character counts. So this one is specifically asking for calculator results, but I would recommend including any other descriptions necessary to show how your project will impact climate change. Now, this is also something that you can include in additional attachments if you want to go beyond the limited character count that is provided. And here we've also included a link to some tools available. So the emissions reduction calculator is a Excel-based tool that FTA has produced and is put on their website and is located at the link provided here. And since we will be providing this this presentation in a PDF form, I believe, you can find the link there, or you can just type in FTA emissions reduction calculator in Google or whatever your search engine is, and it will come up as one of the first search results. So we have not looked into what that calculator includes, but we will be doing that over the coming weeks. The next section is full fleet transition. So the question here is, if applicable, identify how the proposed project and fleet transition plans support the conversion of an agency's overall fleet to zero emissions. And again, they only give you 500 characters. So very brief descriptions would be helpful, and additional attachments can take you a lot further with this if warranted. But this is just a qualitative question about how your agency is proposing transitioning to zero emissions vehicles. The next question is about creating good paying jobs and includes a longer list here of yes, no questions applicable to this section. And I didn't include all of those here because there's a lot of them. But there is an open-ended question as well that follows this prompt. Please describe the use of apprentices and partnerships with workforce development programs that have supportive services. So what will be made clear in the application also is that this only really applies to facility projects. And again, you have a very short character count, so please be very brief in your description here. So I would recommend additional attachments as well, and this is kind of a theme going throughout all of these if you need to expound upon the responses here. And a note here that this can reference design, engineering, and construction jobs within the project as well. Their question is specifically about apprentices and partnerships, but if your project is not using apprentices and partnerships, I would mention other good paying jobs that are being developed here. All right. Now there's a brand new question, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of DRPT guidance on this in a section called procurement methods that reduce customization. So the prompt here is, if applicable, identify the proposed approach, other partners if applicable, and how the procurement approach reduces vehicle customizations. So the only notes here are that DRPT is currently seeking more information on this at this time, but this is likely looking into, I believe, the speed in which one can deploy new vehicles that are delivered. And that those vehicles don't need to go through customization at the manufacturers and can be delivered kind of just off of the floor as they come. Now, like I said, we're looking into some more information on this one because this is a brand new question that I don't think we've ever seen before in these applications. But note here as well that there's only a 500 character count, so there's not much to include here.
And Dan, if I could just quickly jump in on this one too. This is a good time to put in a plug for FTA's upcoming webinars on both the buses and bus facilities and low-no programs. The first webinar that they're going to be conducting is actually tomorrow, February 16th from 1 o'clock to 2:30. There's also another opportunity if you're unavailable for that one on February 28th from 2 to 3:30. So my guess is that in those webinars, they will cover some of these new sections on the supplemental form that are new to this year. So if you're interested, I mean, we're certainly going to be tuning in, but if you're interested on this question or any of the other ones, feel free to join that webinar.
Yeah, hopefully they'll be able to provide some guidance on some of these new elements specifically. All right, so moving on, the next section is the zero emissions fleet transition plan workforce involvement. So again, this is a list of yes or no questions. I believe there's 6 with regard to what FTA is looking for in a workforce involvement section within a transition plan. Again, this only applies to low-no project applications. Now, the workforce involvement piece is one of the 6 required elements of the transition plan that I just went over in a previous slide. Here, it's a very short character count again, so a brief description only a brief description is needed, but any or additional attachments, especially pointing at the transition plan in this section of the transition plan, are warranted here. So FTA can look into it and make sure it satisfies their requirements. And then I believe the final section in the additional considerations is Justice 40. Now, I've included a number of slides here to outline some tools and kind of our take on Justice 40 because it is a relatively new initiative by the federal government. And last year, as I mentioned, it generated a lot of questions in these applications. So just really quickly from the United States Department of Transportation, Justice 40 is an opportunity to address gaps in transportation infrastructure and public services by working towards the goal that many of our grants, programs and initiatives allocate at least 40% of the benefits from federal investment to disadvantaged communities. So that is the overall take from the USDOT on what Justice 40 means to them. How that's operationalized is much more difficult and has not necessarily been illustrated by the federal government. And so back in federal fiscal year 22, this was a brand new section. And from what we can understand is that FTA is still determining the best way to use it. Last year, it was evaluated as a simple pass-fail check, but was not incorporated to the overall evaluation criteria of projects, which were those 6 sections that I mentioned in the previous section of this presentation. And so from what we can gather, Justice 40 is a pass-fail that's important to address, but is not a strict evaluation criteria in determining whether a project is eligible or not eligible for funding at this point in time. USDOT wanted to see last year how applicants responded to create a way to better operationalize the elements of that program or of that initiative. And in future years, what we've gathered also that this might weigh in heavier when evaluating those administrative priorities. So it's really important to answer completely. So FTA has a good idea about what you're thinking as far as addressing this nationwide initiative. So some of the specific questions that you will see regarding Justice 40 are listed here. Does the project support the Justice 40 initiative? That's a simple yes, no. Describe how the project supports the Justice 40 initiative and all the benefits provided. That is a 1,000 character section. And the methodology used to determine the project, how the project meets the Justice 40 initiative is also a 1,000 character section. In addition, they also ask what is the percentage of disadvantaged communities within the project area, and they have a specific tool that they would like agencies to use to estimate that. And the last question was this estimate generated using the Justice 40 online mapping tool, which is that tool that I just mentioned. So this section, specifically the section on how the project supports the Justice 40 initiative, should include a high-level summary of how the project supports the initiative and a description in the methodology section of the methodology used to determine that level of impact. Okay, you only have 1,000 characters here, so maps and other graphics should be included in the supplemental attachment. Now, the tools available, there's 2 highlighted here, the USDOT mapping tool and the climate and economic justice screening tool. The USDOT mapping tool is meant to be used to answer the percentage of disadvantaged communities question, but there is a lot of discretion on the applicant to determine the best way to approach answering these. And so on the next few slides, I've just kind of, I'm going to outline how or what those 2 tools look like and how you could use those to support answering these questions. Then we'll get back into, there's a little bit more information as well on a table that you're supposed to fill out for this section. I'll get into that after the screenshots here. So this right here is a snapshot of the USDOT tool that's meant to be used to calculate the percentage of an area that's transportation disadvantaged. Okay, so using any one of the selection tools that are included in the top left corner, you can highlight your service area or the area impacted by the project, and the tool will provide summary statistics below. So here you can see that of the 219 census tracts that I selected in the greater Richmond area, 44 are considered transportation disadvantaged, which is 20% of the area highlighted. And so that 20% would go into the question regarding the percent of an area that is transportation disadvantaged. So to augment the USDOT tool, you can also use a tool that the federal government has put out called the Climate and Economic Justice tool, which is illustrated here and on the next slide. There's 2 ways to interact with this data. The first is through the online tool by simply typing in your area in the search box, and the map below will indicate the census tracts that are considered underserved or disadvantaged. Or you can download the data and process it through a mapping program like GIS, which allows for more advanced analysis, and it's actually a more direct way to get some results out of this. So Just real quick to highlight the data just using the online tool, if that's the way you would like to interact with this, you can type in your location to zoom to the area of interest, which will highlight all of the census tracts that satisfy at least one of the burden thresholds that are included in the tool. Now, the tool also indicates whether or not the tract is disadvantaged through the light blue shading on the map, but also when you select that census tract, the categories on the right side here, where the arrows are indicating, will indicate which category of burden threshold is surpassed by that census tract. So when you click on those dark blue categories, it will show you which burden threshold specifically it is. So what I've done here was I selected one census tract in Richmond, then I selected the health area, the housing area, and within housing, that census tract satisfies 3 of the burden thresholds within that category. So like I said, this data is much easier to interact with if downloaded and processed in a mapping software, because you can see everything that applies to each of the census tracts and run some more advanced analysis on it. But you can also interact with it through this online tool. Okay, so 2 more slides here on Justice 40. So we wanted to just include a brief example response here on how DRPT addressed this question last year, which was describe how the project supports the Justice 40 initiative. And you can see this short 2-paragraph response, and I'll read through it very quickly. So this project will support the Justice 40 initiative by deploying new transit in the Commonwealth, reducing emissions, and making transit a more attractive, reliable option to riders. Of the census tracts included in the service area for area of Agency A, 17% are considered disadvantaged according to the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, and 8% are considered transportation disadvantaged according to the US DOT mapping tool. And then we went into some other demographic analysis that we did on the service area that was being analyzed. So the demographic makeup of each of the service area indicates that this project would provide benefits to disadvantaged communities within the Agency A service area. Minority groups make up 28% of the population, 5% have limited English proficiency, and 18% are low income or under the federal poverty line. So it was just a very brief way of summarizing some high-level statistics on the area impacted by the project. And then with regard to the table that I mentioned, you're also asked to fill out a table with the prompts that are listed here at the top. So Justice 40 disadvantaged community as identified in the NOFO, and actual or estimated annual ridership counts. So we are aware that many agencies do not collect demographic information on their riders. So the description from the NOFO is quite general on how you should approach this, which leaves a lot of discretion to the applicant. If your agency collects demographic data on riders, of course, it would be best to include actual ridership counts by population group. So we recommend using Title VI populations, EJ populations, or others that are a focus area of your agency. If your agency does not collect demographic information on riders, it can be estimated. And here we've provided just a very, very bare bones methodology for estimating, which is what we used in our previous application. So we looked at the percentage of a specific population group within a service area, and we multiplied that by the total ridership from the previous year. So essentially what that's doing is it's saying if an area includes 20% low income, we assume that 20% of the ridership on the system is low income. I am aware that that is a very, very broad generalization, but FTA is looking for numbers here, and so you can use a broad generalization like that to satisfy what they're looking for. And I know in this Justice 40 section I got into a lot more detail than I did on any of the others, but it's the only one that's asking for all of these really specific demographic measures. And so that actually brings me to the end of my part of the presentation, which just in time. So just this final slide here includes some important dates to keep in mind. The LONO and bus facilities applications are due to FTA on April 13th, 2023. A reminder also to please fill out the FTA Discretionary Assistance Google form that was distributed along with the invitation to this webinar. We ask that you do that 1 week from today, just so we have an idea. But if you do fill it out later, we will continue to monitor the results of that form. But if it is after February 21st, please also reach out to program managers, myself, Grant, or Tiffany if you are looking for assistance from DRPT and did not have the opportunity to fill out a form. We ask that requests for technical assistance from us come in by March 1st of 2023, so we can kind of guide our resources and make sure that we have people assigned to review and to give the advice needed. And then requests for local support we'll accept on a rolling basis until the application deadline. If you do need a letter of support from us, we request that you please don't come in 1 or 2 days before the application is due, but we will do our best as late in the process to satisfy that request. And then finally, the last slide here is just some staff contacts of Grant, Tiffany, and myself. Please feel free to reach out with any questions or follow-up items. And as mentioned before, we will be posting this on our DRPT YouTube account, and I believe we can also distribute this as a PDF, so you all can just kind of flip through it on your own. So before we part ways, are there any other questions?
Looks like nothing in the chat currently. And just for everyone's information, Grant did provide a link to the FTA webinars that he mentioned earlier. So that's for tomorrow, February 16th, as well as the one that's on February 28th. But I guess otherwise, since we are at 12 o'clock and we want to be mindful of everyone's time and probably hunger, I would like to say thank you to Grant and Dan for going through a lot of relevant content. And we hope that this has been useful for everyone attending today. As we've been reiterating throughout today's webinar, this will be recorded, posted on our YouTube page, as well as copies of the slide deck will be distributed out to all the attendees. So please look out for that in your email. And as always, feel free to reach out to any of us. In priority, I always kick things to Grant because I can, but you can also reach out to myself and Dan if you have any questions, as well as our DRPT staff who are on hand and able to help you out in any capacity. So with that, I think we are good to go. Everyone have an excellent rest of your day and week, and be safe.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.